Absolutely. Here's a structured, spiritually rich response in two parts, just as you asked. I've seen 6 keynotes on daily morning prayers and prophetic declarations for victory. As morning as a spiritual gate is, the morning is a strategic time to take advantage of spiritual sensitivity and alignment before the activities of the day begin. 2, as prayer as alignment, not just request, daily morning prayer is primarily about aligning your spirit, mind, and will with divine purpose, not merely asking for things. 3, the power of prophetic declarations. Spoken words come when rooted in truth and faith, shape outcomes by enforcing spiritual realities in the physical realm. 4, cause consistency builds spiritual authority. Victory is sustained through disciplined daily engagement with prayer and declarations, not occasional intensity. 5, victory is enforced, not wished for. Spiritual victory often requires intentional warfare, standing on truth and declaring it boldly despite circumstances. 6, our spiritual atmospheres respond to voice. Darkness retreats, clarity comes, and direction is restored when the believer speaks with conviction and understanding. First, speech. Come, daily morning prayers and prophetic declarations for victory. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, every victorious life is first won in the unseen realm before it is manifested in the physical. What we call success, preservation, progress, and dominion are not accidents of time. They are the outcomes of alignment. And one of the most powerful tools for establishing that alignment is success daily morning prayers and prophetic declarations. Come, the morning is not just the start of a new day, it is a spiritual gateway. Whoever controls the morning often influences the outcome of the day. This is why disciplined individuals, spiritually intelligent people, do not wake up casually. They wake up deliberately. Morning prayer is not a ritual. It is a spiritual positioning system. When you pray in the morning, you are declaring that your day will not be governed by chaos, emotions, or external pressures. You are saying, I take charge by divine authority. But prayer alone is not enough. There must also be as prophetic declarations. Prophetic declarations are not positive thinking or motivational speech. They are as faith-filled proclamations rooted in divine truths. When you speak them, you are enforcing heavenly verdicts upon earthly situations. You are giving voice to what has already been established in the spirit. Understand this. The spiritual realms respond to authority, not silence. Many believers pray silently about matters that require bold declaration. When light speaks, darkness listens. Each morning, when you declare peace, confusion loses permission to operate. When you declare strength, weakness is disarmed. When you declare victory, defeat is denied legal ground. Consistency is key. Occasional prayers may bring moments of relief, but just daily engagement builds spiritual authority. Victory is not sustained by emotional bursts. It is sustained by disciplined devotion. Do not wait for challenges before you speak. Speak ahead of time. Declare wisdom before decisions arise. Declare favor before meetings happen. Declare protection before stepping out. This is how victorious people live. Not reactively, but prophetically. Your voice is not ordinary when aligned with truth and faith. It becomes an instrument of enforcement. Every morning you pray and declare. You are setting boundaries in the spirit. Saying what is allowed and what is not. In conclusion, victory is not something you hope for at the end of the day. It is something you must establish at the beginning. Wake up with intention. Pray with understanding. Declare with authority. and you will discover that your days will begin to obey what your mouth has spoken in alignment with truth. Victory is not distant, it is daily, and it begins every morning. Thank you. The idea of the morning as a spiritual gate is rooted in the understanding that time itself carries spiritual significance, and that certain moments are more receptive to influence than others. Morning represents the first expression of a new cycle, a transition point between rest and activity, silence and noise, the unseen and the visible. At this point, the human spirit is often less cluttered by the demands, emotions, and distractions that accumulate as the day progresses. Because of this, the morning becomes a highly sensitive period where spiritual impressions are clearer and alignment is easier to establish. When a person rises in the morning, they are not merely waking from sleep, they are stepping into a new spiritual territory that has not yet been shaped by words, decisions, or events. Whoever speaks first into that territory often sets its tone. This is why the morning is described as a gate, because gates are points of access, control, and authorization. What is allowed through a gate determines what happens within the city it protects, and in the same way, what is permitted in the morning often determines how the rest of the day unfolds. Spiritually intelligent people understand that days do not unfold randomly. There is always an invisible framework guiding visible outcomes. And mornings are when that framework is most easily influenced. When someone ignores the morning and rushes into activity without spiritual awareness, they leave that gate unattended. In such cases, external pressures, unexpected challenges, emotional reactions, and even negative spiritual influences are able to define the atmosphere of the day. On the other hand, when a person consciously engages the morning through prayer and intentional declarations, they are effectively standing at the gate and deciding what is permitted to enter. Peace, clarity, favor, discipline, and direction can be granted access, while confusion, fear, delay, and frustration are denied entry. This is not mystical exaggeration, but a reflection of how authority operates in both natural and spiritual systems. The morning also represents leadership over time. Time is one of the most powerful resources entrusted to humanity, and leadership over time begins with the first moments of the day. When a person rises early to pray or reflect, they are demonstrating mastery rather than slavery to time. This posture of leadership has spiritual consequences because authority responds to order. Disorder weakens spiritual sensitivity, while intentional structure strengthens it. Morning prayer is therefore not only about speaking to God, but also about training the soul to recognize priority. It teaches the heart that divine alignment comes before productivity and purpose comes before pressure. This internal order then reflects outwardly in better decisions, emotional stability, and heightened awareness throughout the day. Another reason the morning functions as a spiritual gate is because of the principle of first fruits. In spiritual law, that the first portion of anything often determines the quality of what follows. The first words spoken, their first thoughts entertained, and the first focus of the heart carry disproportionate influence. When the morning is given to worry, haste, or negativity, those elements subtly replicate themselves throughout the day. Conversely, when the morning is given to prayer, gratitude, and prophetic alignment, those qualities multiply as the hours progress. The spirit tends to reproduce what it first embraces. This is why many people experience days that feel heavy from the start without any obvious external cause. The gate was already compromised before visible events began. Silence in the morning is also significant. While silence can be peaceful, it can also be permissive. In spiritual terms, silence does not mean neutrality. If a person does not speak intentionally into their day, something else eventually will. Thoughts, emotions, memories, and external voices are always competing to define reality. Morning prayer breaks this competition by asserting intentional dominance. It establishes whose voice carries the highest authority. This is especially important because the human mind is highly suggestible upon waking. The thoughts entertained at that time often linger subconsciously, influencing reactions and perceptions long after the morning has passed. Engaging the morning spiritually also creates continuity between the unseen and the seen. Prayer at this time is less about reacting to problems and more about legislating outcomes. Instead of waiting for challenges to arise before seeking divine help, the individual is proactively shaping the spiritual environment in advance. This approach shifts life from a defensive posture to an authoritative one. Rather than constantly responding to pressure, the person begins to experience days that feel ordered, guided, and restrained from chaos. This does not mean challenges disappear, but it means they occur within boundaries that have already been spiritually established. The concept of the morning as a gate also teaches responsibility. It removes the excuse of randomness and replaces it with intentionality. When a person understands that they have daily access to shape outcomes through early spiritual engagement, they begin to take ownership of their days. This awareness produces maturity because responsibility always precedes authority. Those who consistently guard their mornings develop discernment, discipline, and confidence in spiritual matters. Not because life becomes effortless, but because they are no longer passive participants in it. Morning prayer also trains the spirit to recognize divine timing. There is a rhythm to spiritual life, and mornings help reset that rhythm daily. Just as the body benefits from regular sleep and nourishment, the spirit benefits from early alignment. Over time, this practice sharpens spiritual perception, making it easier to detect warning signals, opportunities, and divine instructions throughout the day. The person becomes more responsive and less reactive, more discerning and less confused. Moving through the hours with an inner sense of direction that feels steady and anchored rather than rushed and scattered. Prayer, when properly understood, goes far beyond the act of asking for solutions, provisions, or interventions. At its core, prayer is a means of alignment, a deliberate process by which a person brings their inner world into harmony with divine order. Many people approach prayer as a transaction, believing it is primarily a platform to present needs and wait for responses. While requests are not wrong, limiting prayer to requests alone reduces its depth and power. Alignment-focused prayer reshapes the individual before it reshapes circumstances. It recalibrates desires, thoughts, emotions, and intentions so that the individual is positioned to walk in purpose rather than constantly struggle against resistance. Alignment in prayer begins with understanding that life functions best when it flows from a higher order. Human effort, intelligence, and ambition have limits. And prayer is the avenue through which those limits are acknowledged and transcended. When a person prays in alignment, they are not attempting to bend divine will to suit personal desires. Instead, they are allowing their own will to be refined, corrected, and elevated. This shift in perspective changes the posture of prayer from desperation to partnership. Rather than approaching prayer as someone lacking, the individual approaches as someone positioning themselves to function accurately within a larger design. This kind of prayer requires stillness before speech. Before words are spoken, the heart must become attentive. Alignment cannot happen in haste because clarity does not emerge from noise. When prayer begins with attentiveness, the individual becomes conscious of internal misalignments such as fear, pride, anxiety, impatience, or misplaced priorities. These internal states often sabotage outcomes more than external opposition. Alignment-focused prayer confronts these inner disruptions honestly, allowing correction to take place internally before action is taken externally. As the inner world becomes ordered, decisions become wiser, responses become calmer, and discernment becomes sharper. Prayer as alignment also addresses identity. Many struggles persist because people pray from confusion about who they are and what authority they carry. When identity is unclear, prayer becomes inconsistent and uncertain. Alignment reestablishes identity by reminding the individual of their position, responsibility, and spiritual capacity. From this awareness, prayer shifts from begging to declaring, from pleading to standing. The person no longer prays merely to escape problems, but prays to engage life from a position of clarity and confidence. This internal stability often reduces unnecessary struggles because many battles are sustained by insecurity rather than opposition. Another dimension of alignment in prayer is the harmonization of purpose and action. It is possible to pray sincerely while living misaligned with one's own prayers. For example, asking for direction while resisting discipline, or asking for growth while avoiding responsibility. Alignment-focused prayer exposes these contradictions gently but firmly. It brings coherence between what is spoken in prayer and what is practiced in daily life. Over time, this coherence produces integrity, and integrity amplifies spiritual effectiveness. When words, intentions, and actions agree, resistance loses strength because there is no internal division to exploit. Prayer as alignment also restores emotional balance. Many people pray while emotionally overwhelmed, hoping prayer will remove the discomfort without addressing its source. Alignment does not suppress emotion, it reorders it. Through prayer, emotions are acknowledged, interpreted, and submitted rather than ignored or indulged. Fear is brought into perspective, anger is restrained by understanding, and sadness is steadied by hope. This emotional realignment allows the individual to respond to situations thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Emotional maturity is one of the quiet but powerful outcomes of consistent alignment-based prayer. In alignment-focused prayer, listening is as important as speaking. Silence within prayer is not emptiness, it is receptivity. When a person learns to listen during prayer, they begin to perceive subtle instructions, impressions, and corrections that would otherwise be missed. This listening posture trains sensitivity and patience, both of which are essential for long-term victory. Many errors in life are not due to lack of effort, but lack of clarity. Alignment produces clarity, and clarity reduces unnecessary struggle. Prayer as alignment also changes the perception of outcomes. Rather than measuring success only by immediate results, the individual begins to value positioning, preparation, and growth. This prevents discouragement when results take time to manifest. The person understands that being aligned today may not always produce visible rewards immediately, but it creates a trajectory that leads towards stability and fulfillment. This mindset fosters endurance because the individual is no longer dependent on constant affirmation to remain committed. Over time, alignment focused prayer reshapes desires. What once seemed urgent may lose its appeal, while what once seemed insignificant may gain importance. This shift is not forced. It happens naturally as perspective deepens. Desires that conflict with purpose gradually lose intensity, while desires that support growth become stronger. This internal transformation reduces inner conflict, making obedience and discipline less burdensome and more intuitive. When prayer is practiced as alignment, life becomes less chaotic, even in the presence of challenges. The individual is no longer tossed between extremes of confidence and doubt, hope and despair. There is a quiet steadiness that comes from knowing one's position and direction. This steadiness influences relationships, work, decision-making, and responses to adversity. Prayer no longer feels like an emergency tool reserved for crises, but becomes a daily mechanism for maintaining accuracy and balance. Through this process, the individual is not merely asking for a better life, but becoming the kind of person capable of sustaining one. The power of prophetic declarations lies in the understanding that words are not merely sounds, but vehicles of authority, intention, and spiritual legislation. Spoken words, especially when uttered with conviction and alignment to truth, have the capacity to influence realities beyond what is immediately visible. Throughout human experience, words have always shaped outcomes, defined identities, and framed possibilities. Prophetic declarations take this natural principle and elevate it by anchoring speech in faith and spiritual insight rather than emotion or circumstance. When a person makes a prophetic declaration, they are not describing what they see. They are announcing what is authorized to be. Prophetic declarations function on the principle that the unseen precedes the seen. Circumstances do not emerge randomly. They are often the result of forces, beliefs, patterns, and permissions that were established earlier. When declarations are made prophetically, they operate at that foundational level. They challenge existing narratives, interrupt negative cycles, and establish new spiritual permissions. This is why silence in critical moments can be costly. Not because silence is always wrong, but because unchallenged narratives tend to perpetuate themselves. A declaration introduces a counter voice, one that insists on a higher reality regardless of present evidence. The effectiveness of prophetic declarations is closely tied to alignment with truth. These declarations are not wishful thinking or verbal optimism. They derive power from accuracy rather than enthusiasm. When words are aligned with divine principles, moral clarity, and spiritual authority, they carry weight. Without this alignment, declarations become empty affirmations that may temporarily motivate but lack the power to transform. True prophetic speech requires understanding, not just confidence. The speaker must know what they are saying, why they are saying it, and the authority under which they are speaking. Another critical aspect of prophetic declarations is that they externalize faith. Faith, when kept internal, remains passive. When spoken, it becomes active. Declarations force belief to take form. They move conviction from the heart into the environment where it can confront opposition and shape outcomes. This is especially important because many challenges persist not because faith is absent, but because it has not been expressed. Prophetic declarations give faith a voice, and that voice becomes a tool of enforcement rather than mere reassurance. Declarations also shape the speaker as much as they shape circumstances. When a person consistently speaks words of alignment, truth, and authority, their mindset begins to shift. The mind gradually conforms to what the mouth repeatedly affirms. Fear weakens when it is contradicted consistently. Doubt loses dominance when it is challenged verbally. Over time, the speaker begins to think differently, act differently, and respond differently, not because circumstances have changed, but because their internal framework has been restructured by intentional speech. This internal transformation often precedes external change. Prophetic declarations are particularly powerful because they operate beyond emotional fluctuation. Feelings are unstable and often misleading, but declarations are rooted in decision rather than mood. A person may feel weak and still declare strength. They may feel uncertain and still declare clarity. This act is not hypocrisy, it is discipline. It is the refusal to allow temporary emotional states to dictate permanent outcomes. By speaking contrary to emotional pressure, the individual establishes mastery over their internal world, which is a prerequisite for influencing the external one. Consistency plays a major role in the effectiveness of declarations. Occasional declarations may inspire, but sustained declarations reprogram. Repetition is not redundancy in this context, it is reinforcement. Just as negative self-talk shapes identity over time, deliberate prophetic speech reshapes perception and expectation. The environment, both internal and external, begins to adjust to the dominant narrative being spoken. Resistance may appear initially, but resistance often signals that change is being attempted at a foundational level. Prophetic declarations also clarify boundaries. When a person declares peace, they are not merely hoping for calm. They are defining what is acceptable. When they declare progress, they are rejecting stagnation. These declarations establish limits in the spiritual and psychological space the individual occupies. Boundaries reduce confusion because they simplify choices and responses. The person becomes less reactive to provocation and less vulnerable to discouragement because their internal boundaries have already been articulated through speech. Another dimension of prophetic declarations is their communal impact. Words spoken consistently do not exist in isolation. They influence atmosphere, whether in families, workplaces, or communities. Dominant speech patterns shape collective mindset. When declarations of hope, discipline, and purpose are spoken regularly, they gradually alter group dynamics. Conversely, environments saturated with complaint and negativity reflect the cumulative effect of careless speech. Prophetic declarations, when practiced consistently, they introduce an alternative atmosphere that others can feel even if they do not fully understand it. Timing also matters. Declarations made before situations unfold often carry greater authority than those made in reaction to crisis. Speaking ahead of time establishes expectation and readiness. It frames interpretation before events occur. When challenges arise, the individual is less shocked and less destabilized because their declarations have already defined how such moments will be processed. This proactive use of speech shifts life from reaction to intention. Ultimately, prophetic declarations are a discipline of responsibility. They require the speaker to be accountable for their words and aware of their influence. Casual speech creates casual outcomes, but intentional speech creates directed outcomes. This awareness produces maturity because the individual can no longer blame circumstances entirely when they have neglected to speak with purpose. Over time, this practice develops spiritual confidence, not rooted in arrogance, but in understanding. The person learns that their voice, when aligned and consistent, is a tool for shaping reality rather than merely describing it. Consistency builds spiritual authority because authority is not merely granted by moments of intensity, but cultivated through sustained alignment over time. Many people desire spiritual influence, clarity, and victory, yet they underestimate the role of repetition and discipline in producing these outcomes. Authority responds to familiarity and order. When an action is repeated consistently, it establishes a pattern, and patterns create recognition. In the spiritual sense, consistency signals seriousness, commitment, and reliability. Sporadic engagement may create emotional highs, but it does not create weight. Authority carries weight, and weight is accumulated, not improvised. One of the reasons inconsistency weakens spiritual effectiveness is that it fragments focus. When prayer, declarations, or spiritual disciplines are practiced irregularly, the mind and spirit never fully settle into alignment. Each attempt feels like a restart rather than a continuation. This constant resetting prevents depth. Depth is essential for authority because shallow engagement produces shallow results. Consistency allows a person to move past surface level experiences into sustained awareness. Over time, the individual no longer struggles to enter a focused or aligned state because their inner world has been trained through repetition. Consistency also builds trust within the self. Many people struggle with confidence, not because they lack ability, but because they lack evidence of their own reliability. When someone commits to daily spiritual practices and follows through consistently, they begin to trust themselves. This internal trust strengthens resolve and reduces inner conflict. Doubt weakens authority because it divides attention. Consistency reduces doubt by proving day after day that the individual can show up regardless of mood, pressure, or circumstance. This self-trust quietly translates into confidence in prayer and declarations. Another important aspect of consistency is that it conditions perception. When a person engages spiritual disciplines daily, they become more sensitive to subtle shifts in thought, emotion, and environment. Inconsistency dulls perception because long gaps reset sensitivity. Just as physical muscles weaken without regular use, spiritual perception fades without continual engagement. Consistency keeps perception sharp, allowing the individual to discern patterns, anticipate challenges, and recognize opportunities early. This early awareness often appears as wisdom or intuition, but it is actually the result of disciplined attentiveness developed over time. Authority also grows through consistency because repetition reinforces identity. What a person does consistently eventually becomes how they see themselves. When someone prays and speaks intentionally every day, they begin to identify as someone who governs their inner world rather than being governed by it. This identity shift is powerful because actions flow naturally from identity. When discipline is internalized as part of who someone is, it no longer feels forced. Authority becomes effortless because it is expressed rather than manufactured. Consistency neutralizes emotional volatility. Many people rely on motivation to sustain spiritual practices, but motivation is unstable. Authority cannot be built on instability. Consistent discipline functions independently of emotion. On days when motivation is high, consistency prevents excess. On days when motivation is low, consistency prevents absence. This balance stabilizes the inner life. Emotional steadiness enhances authority because reactions become measured rather than impulsive. The individual no longer swings between extremes of confidence and discouragement, which often undermines spiritual confidence. There is also a cumulative effect to consistent spiritual engagement. Each day builds upon the previous one, even when progress is not immediately visible. This accumulation is similar to compound growth. Small, faithful actions repeated over time produce results that are disproportionate to their size. Many people abandon consistency because they expect immediate outcomes, not realizing that authority matures quietly. When results finally become visible, they often appear sudden to observers, but they are the product of long, unseen discipline. Consistency also establishes spiritual boundaries. When practices are regular, they create predictable rhythms that protect mental and spiritual space. These rhythms reduce vulnerability to distraction, temptation, and discouragement. Inconsistent practice leaves gaps, and gaps invite intrusion. A guarded life is not guarded by intensity alone, but by regularity. This is why consistent individuals often appear resilient. Their resilience is not the absence of pressure, but the presence of structure that absorbs pressure without collapse. Another dimension of consistency is credibility. Authority is recognized, not claimed. When words and actions are consistent, they carry credibility. In spiritual terms, declarations spoken by someone who lives in alignment carry more influence than those spoken occasionally without follow-through. Consistency aligns speech with lifestyle, and this alignment amplifies impact. Even internally, the mind responds more readily to declarations when it recognizes a history of follow-through. This internal credibility reduces resistance within the self. Consistency also simplifies life. Decision fatigue often weakens spiritual focus. When practices are inconsistent, each day requires renegotiation. When they are consistent, decisions are already made. This frees mental energy for discernment rather than debate. Authority flourishes in simplicity because clarity is preserved. The individual no longer wastes energy deciding whether to engage, they simply do. This automatic obedience strengthens discipline and reduces internal friction. Over time, their consistency produces spiritual maturity. Maturity is the ability to remain aligned regardless of external conditions. Consistent practice trains endurance, patience, and restraint. These qualities are essential for authority because authority is tested under pressure. Without endurance, people abandon alignment when results delay. Without patience, they force outcomes prematurely. Without restraint, they misuse influence. Consistency develops all three qualities gradually and sustainably. Consistency also shifts the relationship with time. Instead of rushing for breakthrough moments, the individual learns to value daily faithfulness. This reduces anxiety and comparison. Authority grows best in environments free from haste and competition. When someone understands that growth is incremental, that they stop striving to prove themselves and start focusing on accuracy. Accuracy attracts authority because it reflects alignment with order rather than ego. Through consistency, spiritual practices move from obligation to expression. What once required effort becomes natural. Prayer becomes less about discipline and more about posture. Declarations become less about effort and more about agreement. Authority emerges quietly through this transformation, not as something assumed, but as something recognized through stability, depth, and sustained alignment over time. Victory is often misunderstood as a passive outcome that arrives simply because one hopes, desires, or waits long enough. This misunderstanding causes many people to live in prolonged frustration, believing that sincerity alone guarantees results. In reality, victory operates on the principle of enforcement rather than wishful expectation. To enforce victory means to take responsibility for outcomes through intentional alignment, disciplined action, and authoritative engagement with opposing forces. Nothing of value is sustained by desire alone. It is sustained by insistence. Victory responds to resolve, not sentiment. Wishing assumes that circumstances will eventually change on their own, while enforcement assumes that circumstances must be confronted and directed. This difference is critical because life naturally drifts toward disorder unless guided deliberately. Their challenges do not retreat simply because they are disliked. Resistance does not disappear because it is inconvenient. Victory requires confrontation, and confrontation requires courage, clarity, and persistence. Those who wait passively often confuse patience with inaction, not realizing that patience without engagement eventually becomes resignation. Enforcement begins with internal governance. Many people attempt to enforce victory externally while remaining internally divided. Fear, doubt, indecision, and inconsistency weaken authority before any external action is taken. A divided inner world produces weak enforcement because opposing forces exploit hesitation. To enforce victory, one must first establish order within thoughts, emotions, and convictions. This internal alignment creates the stability necessary to confront external resistance without retreating at the first sign of pressure. Victory also demands the correct use of authority. Authority is not aggression or volume. It is clarity backed by alignment. When someone enforces victory, they are not reacting emotionally, but acting deliberately. They understand what is permissible and what is not, and they are willing to draw boundaries accordingly. Boundaries are essential to enforcement because without them, intrusion becomes normalized. Many defeats are sustained not by overwhelming opposition, but by the gradual erosion of boundaries that were never defended firmly. Another reason victory must be enforced is because opposition is often persistent. Challenges rarely withdraw after a single confrontation. They test consistency and resolve. If enforcement is weak or inconsistent, resistance learns that persistence will eventually win. Enforcement requires the willingness to repeat action until resistance yields. This repetition is not obsession, that it is discipline. Consistent enforcement communicates seriousness, and seriousness attracts results. Enforcing victory also requires responsibility for decisions. It is easier to blame circumstances, people, or timing than to accept the role of choice. Yet victories is closely tied to decision making. Decisions determine direction, and direction determines outcomes. Indecision creates delay, and delay weakens momentum. When victory is enforced, decisions are made deliberately, even when conditions are imperfect. Waiting for ideal circumstances often results in stagnation because ideal conditions rarely exist. Another important aspect of enforcement is endurance. Victory is rarely instantaneous. It unfolds over time through sustained effort and resilience. Those who enforce victory understand that resistance is part of the process, not evidence of failure. They do not interpret difficulty as denial, but as confirmation that progress is occurring. This mindset prevents discouragement and reduces emotional exhaustion. Endurance allows enforcement to continue even when visible progress is slow. Enforcement also requires clarity of intention. Vague goals produce weak enforcement because there is no clear standard to defend. When intentions are unclear, effort becomes scattered. Clear intention focuses energy and simplifies decision making. It defines what success looks like and what compromises are unacceptable. With clarity, enforcement becomes more precise and effective. Without clarity, effort is wasted reacting to distractions rather than advancing purpose. Victory must be enforced because opposition adapts. Challenges change form when initial strategies fail. Enforcement requires adaptability without abandoning principles. This balance between firmness and flexibility is crucial. Rigidity breaks under pressure, while adaptability sustains momentum. Those who enforce victory remain committed to the outcome while adjusting methods as needed. This adaptability prevents stagnation and allows progress to continue despite shifting conditions. Another reason enforcement is necessary is because comfort weakens resolve. When discomfort arises, the temptation to retreat becomes strong. Many people abandon enforcement prematurely because they associate resistance with personal inadequacy. In reality, discomfort often accompanies growth. Enforcing victory means accepting temporary discomfort for long-term stability. This acceptance strengthens resolve and reduces fear of challenge. Their enforcement also involves the disciplined use of language. Words shape perception, and perception shapes action. Passive language produces passive behavior. When people speak as though outcomes are uncertain or dependent solely on external factors, they weaken their own resolve. Enforcing victory requires deliberate speech that reflects intention rather than fear. This does not mean denying reality, but defining it accurately and purposefully. Language becomes a tool of direction rather than description. Another dimension of enforcement is accountability. Those who enforce victory hold themselves accountable for follow-through. They do not rely solely on inspiration or emotion. Systems, habits, and routines support enforcement by reducing reliance on willpower. This structure sustains effort during low motivation periods. Accountability transforms intention into action consistently. Victory is also enforced through focus. Distraction weakens enforcement because attention is divided. When focus is scattered, energy is diluted. Enforcing victory requires prioritization and the willingness to say no to distractions that undermine progress. This selective attention protects momentum and preserves clarity. Enforcement demands humility as well. Pride resists correction, but correction is often necessary for progress. Those who enforce victory remain teachable, willing to adjust when strategies fail. This humility prevents stagnation and allows growth. Enforcement is not stubbornness, it is commitment guided by wisdom. Ultimately, victory responds to those who refuse to negotiate with defeat, wishing hopes that defeat will eventually disappear. But enforcement denies it permission to remain. This posture transforms life from passive endurance to intentional direction, where outcomes are shaped deliberately through responsibility, clarity, endurance, and disciplined engagement rather than expectation alone. The idea that spiritual atmospheres respond to voice is grounded in the understanding that environments are not neutral and silence is rarely empty. Every space carries an atmosphere shaped by thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and spoken words. While physical environments respond to physical actions, spiritual atmospheres respond primarily to authority expressed through voice. Voice is the medium through which intention calm. Belief and authority are released into an environment. When a person speaks, they are not only communicating information, they are projecting influence. This influence interacts with the unseen dimensions that govern mood, perception, resistance, and openness within a space. Atmospheres form whether or not people are conscious of them. Fear-filled words create tension even before danger appears. Hope-filled words can stabilize people in the middle of crisis. This happens because words carry agreement. Whatever is spoken consistently invites corresponding conditions to settle and remain. When negative speech dominates, discouragement becomes normalized. When intentional and authoritative speech is present, clarity and order begin to prevail. The atmosphere responds not merely to sound but to conviction. Casual words produce casual effects, but deliberate words spoken with understanding shape environments more deeply. Voice establishes dominance. In any setting, the strongest voice often sets the tone. Not necessarily the loudest, but the most consistent and confident. This principle operates socially, psychologically, and spiritually. When confusion fills a space, it is often because there is no clear voice establishing direction. When peace enters, it is usually because someone has spoken stability into uncertainty. This demonstrates that atmospheres do not require force to change, they require direction. Direction is given through voice. Spiritual atmospheres are especially sensitive to spoken words because words translate internal states into external influence. Thoughts remain private, but spoken words become public declarations. Once released, they shape expectations and permissions. An atmosphere of fear gains strength when fear is spoken openly and repeatedly. An atmosphere of faith strengthens when confidence is voiced despite pressure. This is why environments can feel heavy or light even without obvious reasons. The dominant voices have already done their work. Voice also interrupts momentum. Atmospheres tend to drift toward entropy without intervention. If negativity is left unchecked, it deepens. Silence in the presence of disorder often reinforces disorder because it allows existing momentum to continue unchallenged. Speaking with authority interrupts this momentum. It introduces a new direction and forces adjustment. This interruption does not always produce immediate visible change, but it begins a shift that unfolds progressively. Another important dimension is that atmospheres recognize consistency. One-time statements may inspire momentarily, but repeated declarations reshape space over time. Just as repeated negativity creates chronic heaviness, repeated intentional speech establishes stability. Consistency trains an environment to respond predictably. Over time, the atmosphere becomes conditioned to certain tones and expectations. This conditioning explains why some environments feel calm even under pressure, while others feel chaotic even during routine moments. Voice also clarifies boundaries within an atmosphere. When someone speaks intentionally, they define what is acceptable. Declaring peace sets a boundary against chaos. Declaring focus sets a boundary against distraction. These boundaries are not enforced through force, but through clarity. When clarity is present, confusion loses legitimacy. This is why environments with strong leadership often feel ordered. The leader's voice has already defined the limits. Spiritual atmospheres respond to voice because voice reflects authority. Authority is not derived from position alone, but from alignment and conviction. When a person speaks from alignment, their words carry weight. Weight is what atmospheres respond to. Words without weight dissipate quickly. But words spoken with understanding linger. They continue influencing perception, mood, and decision making long after they are spoken. Voice also shapes internal atmospheres. Calm. A person's inner world responds to their own words as much as external spaces do. Negative self-talk creates internal resistance, fatigue, and confusion. Intentional self-directed speech restores order and confidence. This internal atmosphere then influences how the person engages external environments. Calm. Someone who speaks clarity internally is less affected by external chaos because their inner atmosphere is already governed. Atmospheres respond to voice because voice establishes agreement. Whatever is spoken repeatedly becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces resistance. This is why environments saturated with complaint feel heavy. Complaint has become normal. When intentional declarations are introduced, they initially meet resistance because they are unfamiliar. Over time, as they are repeated, resistance weakens and adjustment occurs. The atmosphere begins to align with the new narrative. Timing also affects how atmospheres respond. Speaking early establishes tone before momentum builds. Early declarations are preventative rather than corrective. When clarity is spoken at the beginning, confusion has less room to grow. When peace is declared early, anxiety struggles to gain traction. This proactive use of voice is more efficient than reacting after disorder has already matured. Voice also carries emotional information. Tone, confidence, and calmness transmit stability. Even when words are simple, the emotional state behind them influences atmosphere. A calm voice under pressure can de-escalate tension without changing circumstances. This demonstrates that atmospheres respond not only to content, but to posture. Posture is revealed through voice. Another aspect is that atmospheres resist ambiguity. Vague speech creates uncertainty, and uncertainty weakens environments. Clear declarations simplify complexity. They give the mind and spirit something stable to align with. When clarity is spoken, decision-making becomes easier and resistance decreases. This is why decisive speech often brings relief, even when solutions are not immediate. Atmospheres also remember. Words spoken during critical moments leave lasting impressions. A single statement made during crisis can define how an environment processes future challenges. This memory effect explains why certain phrases carry emotional weight long after the moment has passed. Voice imprints atmosphere. Ultimately, voice functions as a governing instrument. It does not merely reflect reality, it frames it. When people understand this, they become more intentional with speech. They stop using words carelessly and begin using them directionally. Environments begin to respond not because circumstances have changed, but because authority has been expressed through consistent, aligned, and deliberate voice that continues shaping perception, expectation, and response over time. In bringing all these truths together, it becomes clear that victory is not accidental, emotional, or occasional. It is deliberate, disciplined, and sustained. Daily morning prayers and prophetic declarations are not religious routines, but strategic engagements that position a person to govern their days rather than endure them. When the morning is treated as a spiritual gate, alignment is established early. When prayer is understood as alignment rather than mere requests, the inner world is ordered before external demands arise. When prophetic declarations are spoken with understanding and consistency, unseen realities are enforced until they manifest visibly. Through consistency, spiritual authority is built quietly but firmly, giving weight to words and stability to actions. victory then shifts from something hoped for to something enforced. Because responsibility replaces passivity and intention replaces chance. As the voice is released with clarity and conviction, atmospheres respond, boundaries are established. Calm and order replaces chaos. The result is a life that is not driven by pressure, fear, or reaction, but one that moves with direction, clarity, and sustained triumph, shaped daily by alignment, authority, and intentional spiritual engagement.